Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is a special live episode of Dispatches. After nearly a year of genocide in Gaza, Israel has expanded its atrocities to Lebanon. Israel has been firing at Lebanon since October 8th, after Hezbollah began its precision strikes on Israeli military targets in solidarity with the people of Gaza. As the Israelis and Americans take a victory lap over the assassination of Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah, and their carpet bombing of Lebanon, displacing 1 million people and bringing the country to the brink of catastrophe, many are terrified and wondering what comes next. Hezbollah has taken painful hits to its senior leadership, leaving many people shocked and Israel and the US confident about going all the way. Is Israel going to invade Lebanon? Is Lebanon going to become the next Gaza? What will Hezbollah do? What will Iran do? How does this end? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by veteran war correspondent and analyst Elijah Magnier. Elijah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
It's always a pleasure to have you on and to hear your expertise on these issues. And people are really shocked right now because Hassan Nasrallah has been confirmed to have been assassinated, something that I don't think anybody expected. Moreover, it's been a horrific 2 weeks, as you know, as many who are watching know, with just one Israeli terrorist attack after another on Lebanon. And every day we see the Israelis taking out senior commanders, senior leaders in Hezbollah in quite a shocking way. So I guess I want to start off with something you recently laid out in a piece that you published at your website, and that is, what many people want to know is, how did this happen? How has Israel managed to essentially, infiltrate Hezbollah in some way, to the point where they're able to take out its secretary general and many of its senior leadership over and over again, despite Hezbollah likely taking precautions after it first started to happen?
Since the war in 2006, the Israeli realized that they are facing a very powerful non-state actor that changed the plan of the US for a new Middle East that the then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice was advertising for. And they thought by removing Hezbollah from the equation, occupying Iraq, and then threatening Syria or occupying Syria, then they can change the Middle East and make sure that by fear, they can push all the countries of the Middle East to the Abraham Accord and to normalize with Israel. This plan failed in 2006 when the Israelis failed to achieve their objectives. But then Hezbollah became the target of the Americans and the Israelis. When I say the Israelis, it's always important to keep in mind that America comes first before the Israelis, because they are the one who wants to eliminate Hezbollah. They are the one who occupied Iraq and then broke into Syria and wanted to create a failed state for the objective to end up in Iran, as General Wesley Clark told the world that the Americans were planning to occupy 7 countries in 5 years, including Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. So for that, Hezbollah became the target. What happened is the war broke out in 2011, and Hezbollah was very busy in making sure that the Takfiri, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda will not prevail. Simultaneously, Israel and the Americans were working on artificial intelligence, collecting information behind Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has become bigger, a huge organization with many effectives, starting to use drones, starting to be engaged with a classical army like the Syrian army, but then again with the Russian, coordinating with a superpower. And Hezbollah was busy in that war. And the Americans and the Israelis and their allies in the region, because the Israelis are part of CENTCOM, the US Central Command, where there are many countries in the Middle East sharing intelligence information with the Israelis and the Americans, including the British that are in Cyprus and everybody else share information with the Israelis. This is where the main objective was Hezbollah. And Hezbollah did not really pay attention to all this crowd of intelligence gathering and the development of the artificial intelligence because it was a matter of existence. If the ISIS and Al Qaeda prevail, then there is no point in really looking for anything else because they were knocking the door of Damascus. When Jabhat al Nusra, led by an ISIS emir that later became Al Qaeda and then went solo, was really operating inside Damascus. Now, all that collection of information, and because Hezbollah's leaders in the Jihadi Council, the highest level of command, of military command, because there is the Shura Council that is higher, and this is where the decision makers are sitting. The Shura and the Jihadi Council were busy in distributing jobs, in participating in person in Syria. Like we've seen many of these people losing their life, etc. Please stop me when you want if I'm going. Yeah.
No, it's but this is I mean, it's important you're saying this because I mean there was a Financial Times article that came out and I sent it to you before we recorded that basically made it pointed out the Syria factor and that Hezbollah fighting in Syria is what opened it up to all these forces that were able to like basically spy on it and follow it. But of course, like you mentioned, Hezbollah didn't really have a choice when it came to Syria. It was it was an existential crisis for Lebanon and the region. As you're saying. But no, please continue. So I essentially what we're hearing here, and you lay this out very much in detail in your piece, is there's a really high level of algorithms and different sorts of technological intelligence gathering methods that Israel has been using for years and years and years to basically map out Hezbollah's leadership and follow their movements. And one thing that I want to actually ask you about that I saw in this Financial Times article, Elijah, I'm going to read this part because I kept thinking to myself, why now? Like, okay, so Israel's had all this intelligence. Why now? In the financial piece, it suggests that there was a lot of not just surveillance, but trickery taking place. It says, for more than 10 months, Israel and Hezbollah traded cross-border fire since October. While Israel killed a few hundred of Hezbollah's low-level operatives, the vast majority of them within a slowly expanding theater of the conflict, stretching a few kilometers north of the border. That appears to have lulled Nasrallah into thinking that the two arch rivals were involved in a new sort of brinksmanship, with well-defined red lines that could be managed until Israel agreed to a ceasefire in Gaza with Hamas, allowing Hezbollah an off-ramp that would allow it to agree to a ceasefire with Israel. So I'm just curious if you can speak to that. I mean, do you agree with that, first of all, that Israel must have had this intelligence about these people's movements it's been following for a very long time, in very technologically advanced ways that I don't think any of us really understood was happening, obviously. And then they decided to hit the trigger now, after basically tricking Hezbollah and a lot of us in the world for the last, 10 months, 11 months, almost 12 months.
It's important to understand the entire military dynamic to be able to come close to the reality, what's happening and why, and how Israel managed to discover the places, etc., bomb the missile, and all that. Since the 7th of October, Hezbollah has been engaged the following day, on the 8th of October, in supporting Gaza. Because the whole world gave up on Gaza and everybody's watching the civilians killed, and nobody's doing anything, the violation of international laws, the war crimes and crimes against humanity, Hezbollah moved from the human approach, saying, well, we support the Palestinian people unless Israel stops the war on Gaza. They did not say on Hamas, they said on the Palestinian population. Now, this didn't happen. Hezbollah used, according to the Israelis, around 8,000 rockets, laser-guided missiles, and drones throughout the war. Now, what happened is that Hezbollah understands that in any war, there is a need of a lot of ammunition. Israel received more than 50,000 tons of ammunition from America on its own, without Germany, UK, France, Canada, Australia, etc. And Israel is an ammunition producer. They have manufacturing of ammunition in Israel. Therefore, for Hezbollah to imagine that Israel can wage war on Lebanon, Hezbollah needs a lot of ammunition. And perhaps with the Israeli air dominance, Israel can close the border between Lebanon and Syria. Therefore, they need a lot of ammunition to store in the country just in case Israel wants to start a war. And
Mhm.
there are two levels of storage. One is under the ground, and another one is above the ground. While Hezbollah was using more than 8,000 drones, missiles, rockets, they need a refill. And this is where, with the satellite, with the electronic intelligence, with the drones, 24 hours, 7 above Syria and Lebanon. And I'm talking here about 9 satellites that are static above the area, including the British and the Americans and the Israelis. They see the movement of ammunition and where these have been stored. So, therefore, it is easy for them to go after these warehouses and bomb and destroy them. But whatever they have managed to destroy is again above the ground, what was stored as an additional ammunition to what Hezbollah has. And then when the Israelis decided to start a war, they felt confident that there was a rule of engagement established by Hezbollah, that Hezbollah and Israel would fight within 7 to 8 kilometers along the borders only, and the internal front will not be touched on both sides. Israel will not bomb civilians, and the Israelis would do exactly the same. There were violations of the Israelis in different occasions, but something that can be within the acceptable condition that Israel allowed itself to cheat a little bit by
Mhm.
killing around 60 civilians in the first 11 months, which is something that was accepted as collateral damage by Hezbollah and did not consider that it's an incentive to start bombing the Israeli civilians. But then Israel felt that it needs to see Hezbollah's missile. And then they saw that they can destroy all Hezbollah's missile capability. They know where the leaders are, the commanders are, and they can go after them because they have enough human and geospatial intelligence. They have electronic intelligence. They have human intelligence. They have people on the ground, and they can monitor everything. And because of that high capability, they felt confident they can go to war against Hezbollah and then take the lead to destroy the Hezbollah capability and nothing else. So what they have started is they've started with the sabotage attacks on the pager the first day, the second day the ICOM V84, and then they start killing the leaders and telling Hezbollah in their acts, we're not attacking civilians. Of course, attacking a leader resulted in killing 8 civilians and wounding 85. That is for Shukr. And then they developed to other civilians, other objective, military objective, but always in building where there are civilians and triggering the death of many civilians. But for the Israelis, their pretext is we hitting only military targets and the rest are collateral damage. But then suddenly they shifted. And from one day to another, they open fire, they start bombing all the Hezbollah members in the south of Lebanon in their homes, where there are their children, their wife, their parents, their grandparents, because families live together in the south of Lebanon. And this is where they inflicted a very large number of civilians that are not considered collateral damage, because intentionally the Israelis allowed themselves to kill one operative and 10 civilians, but one commander and 100 civilians. That is an Israeli rule that nobody is supposed to abide by. This is a crime against humanity and war crime. But the Israelis consider themselves unaccountable and they can do it. And this is when they want to, the objective to kill the Hezbollah Secretary General. Now, I can share some insightful information that I have not published yet about how they killed Sayyid Nasrallah, if that is part of your questions.
Please, yeah.
The place that they have targeted is a place known as the Command and Control from the 8th of October, run by Fuad Shukr, the person that was appointed at the head of the military operation in support of the Palestinians. And he went to these places on a very regular basis. So the Israelis saw that place. And it is not always something that the Israelis do when they see a high value target in the hope that they can see a higher value target. And when they killed Fuad Shukr, they did not kill him in the operational room. They killed him in a flat on the 7th floor in a building where he was staying. So they gave the impression that the other place was not discovered and that they did not bomb it. And that perhaps was a lack of attention from Hezbollah that needed to change all the places when the Israelis started to bomb everything. But it's not easy to start shifting a whole infrastructure that is prepared for a war and then improvise something when you have all the Israeli jets in the sky 24/7 and you have drones 24/7 above the suburb of Beirut and the south of Lebanon, and then you have the support of the Americans and their allies. Improvising something new costs a lot of money, and it is not something that the Israelis or the watchers will not see. And they counted on the fact that this place was not seen. And this is where the Israelis waited, because they saw a movement similar to the movement around Sayyid Nasrallah, when he moved around like the head of his office, the head of his security, etc. And then they were able to put the dots together. But what is worrisome is they said they've used information from the unit 9,900, 9,100, and 504, which a combination of human intelligence, visual intelligence, and electronic intelligence. So they had the visual, they had the human intelligence, and they had the electronic. And the combination of all three gave the information and the confirmation that the what they call the golden target is in the cage.
Yeah.
This is where they gave the operation a go, which took several hours because it needs a preparation. We're talking about a squadron of 42 jets with 85 bombs of 1 ton and an escort to these jets, etc., and to go and target this specific location to make sure that no one will remain alive.
And that's where you get the 85 bombs, including U.S. supplied bunker buster bombs and all the jets and the entire operation, which people have probably read about, you've written about. And I just want to say a couple of things before I ask the next question, Elijah. First of all, I know I shouldn't respond to trolls, but I just see someone making really obnoxious comments about Rania ran away from Lebanon. And I just want to say to that, I actually came here before all this started, but also how dare anybody demand anybody stay in a place Israel's bombing? Because as we've seen, Israel is a psychotic country that is willing to kill 300 civilians to assassinate one person and is currently genocided Gaza and is trying to extend that to Gaza. So it's really not up to some idiot in a comment section to try to talk about somebody's bravery or lack of it, because they're not in a place that Israel's carpet bombing. Anyways, I'm going to leave that there. But what I do want to say is I think a lot of people are oscillating between two feelings on this, Elijah. And one is, for the last year now, before all this started, Hezbollah did seem to have a form of strategic deterrence against Israel. At least everybody felt it. And it gave people in a lot of Lebanon, obviously not in the southern villages, but a feeling of safety. And that's been a bit shattered at this moment, because at this moment, it feels very much like Israel's kind of omnipotent. Like they just know everything. They could get to Hassan Nasrallah. They know and see where everyone is. And it's quite a scary prospect, you know? Even my own family is becoming more uncomfortable, even just communicating over the phone to tell us if they're okay, because they don't know what Israel's watching, because everyone feels like Israel's watching everything, and maybe they are. There's also a feeling, I think, among people that the Israelis are somehow like made of titanium or something, and we're made of paper. So they can just kill like 100 of us like it's nothing, and we die so easily. And then they have this iron dome that protects them, and they can't be touched. And so to that, I want to ask you, all this time, and you and I have done episodes on this before where you've explained Hezbollah's capabilities. So I guess here's where I want to start with this. Israel has obviously taken out a significant portion of Hezbollah's senior leadership. And obviously some mistakes were made, and I'm sure there's a reckoning about that, and hopefully a reflection on that among the resistance axis leadership, or whoever's taking over at this point. But all that's to say, how degraded are they? Are they like, what are their capabilities still? Israel took out leaders, very important figures. We cannot deny that there have been massive blows, and Lebanon is in a catastrophic situation right now. And everybody's wondering, where is this capability we heard about Hezbollah's ability to hit back? And what's the response going to be, if they're even capable of one?
The reaction is normal. People are not expert in warfare, and perhaps they did not live enough wars to understand that we are just at the beginning, only 2 weeks. The war started with a pager, really. And then with a pager, there were one hit after another. That's one. Two, the Israelis have the air superiority and dominance. And I've written several weeks ago that Israel had 13 to 15,000 targets to bombard. And when they finish their bank of objectives, Hezbollah will react. It turned out that I am wrong, because actually Israel has only 3,500 targets, not 13,000, because today they said, we've done it. That's great, which means that when there is an air dominance, people don't go out and open their warehouses and start firing against Israel, offering to Israel a new and updated bank of objectives. On the contrary, you've done your job, you're finished, you show everything you have. Now you feel the victory. Great. Did Israel occupy Lebanon? Did Israel declare that Hezbollah has been defeated? On the contrary, the Lebanese and the world is watching and saying that Hezbollah has been defeated, while the Israelis are saying 10% of Hezbollah's capability has been destroyed. We're talking about 10%. So after carpet bombing Lebanon for 2 weeks, all bombarding all these capabilities, all the families of the militants and the militants, they've managed to come out with a total, since the beginning of the war, around 1,700 people who were killed. Is this all what Israel can do in terms of war? I'm not encouraging or undermining the number of killed or the number of targets destroyed. On the contrary, if Israel is right, then the invasion will happen in the next few days, and that will be it. Israel will walk into Lebanon, and then it can occupy the area that it wants. But what's happening is, first, the ground forces, the special forces, have not been engaged in any war or any confrontation against Israel from the 7th of October until today. The special forces were not involved in this war. Only the missile forces that are part of the 3 units, 2 south of the Litani River and 1 north of the Litani River. These are the units that were fighting Israel in the last almost 12 months. Secondly, all the warehouses, the excess of warehouses, Not all of them have been destroyed, showing that the Israelis in some places had old information, but it doesn't matter. Everything that's under the ground is still intact. And I think in the next 48 hours, we will see if Hezbollah has the capability to regain the initiative after Israel said, I'm done with the objectives, and now I'm going to look for something else because they feel the victory. And feeling the victory is deadly when the Israelis are not really estimating the strength of the enemy. Hezbollah has received a hit. That is true. Hezbollah has failed in several small tactical battles, but the war has not started yet. We're just the beginning. We still have a year ahead, several months ahead. So people are going to start falling into the Israeli propaganda and what they see, thinking that 150,000 members of Hezbollah, that Hezbollah said, this is how we are. Suppose Hezbollah is not telling the truth and it has only half of that. So that is, we're talking about 75,000 only. So if Israel managed to kill 1,700 or even 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, there's still at least tens of thousands waiting to fight. So what the Israelis are not saying we have won. John Kirby today, the spokesperson of the US government, said Hezbollah today is not like Hezbollah a week ago. And Hezbollah's chain of command has been destroyed. All the leaders have been destroyed. I can tell you, all the leaders have been already replaced. The announcement of Sayyid Nasrallah's death took place only when a new Secretary General was elected. The killing of every single commander was announced when immediately another commander took place. For example, the Akil was killed among other Rudwan commanders. 7 of these commanders came out alive. They died from the pressure, but the other 7 were very close to the exit and they did not die because Hezbollah did not hit the same room under the ground, but 100 meters away, and the pressure killed many people. But there are 7 that did not die. And there are around 200 other commanders that are ready to replace those who are going to be killed in the battlefield.
So let me ask you this. This is a criticism that I've been hearing people say, and I'm curious your thoughts, because I think up until now, the resistance groups and Iran have been quite restrained, right, in their response to Israel. And some of the criticism has been that perhaps this was a mistaken way of dealing with Israel. Perhaps too much restraint has made these groups look weak and has emboldened the Israelis. For example, the Iranians have yet to respond to Ismail Haniyeh being murdered by the Israelis in Tehran. Hezbollah has responded to, various assassinations prior to the last couple of weeks, of course, but the responses have not been, have been calibrated to, not provoke a wider scale war in hopes that, they could continue this sort of tit for tat with Israel. That didn't expand any further, but that didn't work. And now, the Israelis, we've seen them displace 1 million people in Lebanon. We've seen them, taking out entire residential buildings. I mean, today they've been bombing many residential homes in Soud, for example, which is something I didn't think I was going to see. There's displaced people everywhere, like sleeping on sidewalks. It's just a horror show. And so all that's to say, my question for you is, do you think that being restrained by these groups has militarily been the wrong strategy given Israel's responses? And then on top of that, everybody's wondering, is Iran going to get involved? Is Iran going to do anything? Or is it going to continue to be restrained? And then some people are saying if Iran continues to be restrained, I mean, they're next, right? You even have the Israelis saying it, by the way. I don't know if they'll actually carry through, their words, but the Israelis are making threats to the Iranian supreme leader, basically saying you're next.
Why Iran would be involved in this war? To show that Hezbollah is weak. Hezbollah is not weak. Hezbollah received several hits. The strength of Hezbollah has not come out yet. We haven't seen any involvement of the naval unit. They still intact. The ground forces unit, they still intact. The long-range missile units, they still intact. The missile unit that is on the borders with Syria and inside Syria opposite the Golan height, the occupied Golan height, they're still intact. Why would Iran join when Iran can continue supplying Hezbollah with what Hezbollah needs without declaring war on the United States and Israel? Because declaring war on Israel means on the United States because they are together. On the contrary, Iran now is free to move around. It can come to Syria, that is doing, offer to Syria the know-how that has done, offer the material to manufacture weapons and missiles. Well, actually, the Fadi 1 and 2, 3 are Syrian missiles. They frog missiles with advanced GPS on their tail to make sure that they can reach the objective within a certain precision. Why give up on all that just to say, hey, we declare war on Israel and we're part of the war directly? Every single bullet fired by Hezbollah, by Iran, by Yemen, and by Iraq comes from Iran. Iran is involved in this battle since 1982. But being involved directly and declare war and come in, it means the Iran allies have given up and they have no more strength to fight. And as I said earlier, we just started 2 weeks ago. Still have so many months ahead. The war did not finish. On the contrary, it's just beginning. The Israelis tested Hezbollah's capability, and Hezbollah learned what Israel knows and what are the objectives that were uncovered to the Israelis. Good. Other objectives are not. Other warehouses are not. Other leaders are still not known for Hezbollah. There are thousands of leaders that have not been killed. Killing 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 is part of the war. So it's like when I ask a general, if there are 8 major generals in the army, as there are 8 people in the Jihadi Council, and 3 or 5 of these have been killed, how many generals will replace them? He said 2,000. They're all waiting because there aren't spaces for more than these 8 occupying all the key positions. So Hezbollah is an irregular, organized army.
Yeah, no, those are all really good points. I want to thank people who are throwing money in the super chat. And one person in particular, I just want to show the comment. His name's Nader. Says, my family's from areas next to Sur, Tyre. My heart is broken seeing what my people are going through. I visited most summers. Stay strong, my people. Thank you so much, Nader, and I'm with you on that. And I wanted to ask you also, I just want to remind people, if you want to help support the show, you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a member. And I do appreciate the comments in the super chat. Elijah, I wanted to ask you about Israel's ultimate goal here, because, they're talking about limited ground incursions. They're obviously feeling very emboldened, and it does seem like they're going to try some sort of ground invasion. And I know you've often said that will be their graveyard, because that's where Hezbollah will be able to really shine in its capabilities if Israel's on their turf. But that said, we do see these groups in Israel talking about resettling southern Lebanon, even changing the names of Lebanese villages and towns to Jewish names. You see Israeli officials talking about buffer zones, reoccupation. They want to go to the Litani. I mean, we know this is their ultimate goal, right? At the end of the day, they have expansionist ambitions on top of the fact that they do want to get rid of a military threat to their north. So I guess my question there is, and I also wanted to add 2 things here. One, the Israelis have essentially put like a sort of military blockade on Lebanon. They're bombing border crossings with Syria. They're threatening to bomb any attempt by the Lebanese to fix those border crossings in an attempt to stop, I guess, in their minds, weapon flows, right, to Hezbollah. And then they're also threatening the airport. They're saying that any plane that lands at Beirut airport needs to be given permission or cleared by the Israelis, which is actually how an occupying power behaves. I just want to point out how outrageous that is, because it's a complete violation of the sovereignty of an internationally recognized country called Lebanon. On top of that, you have the Americans, and I saw you pointing this out on Twitter. You have the Americans telling the Iraqis they are not allowed to send anything to Lebanon without it first being inspected and cleared by the Americans. Another violation of the sovereignty of an internationally recognized country. I guess we shouldn't be surprised that this is the behavior of the Israelis and the Americans. All that's to say, there definitely does seem to be ambitions to reoccupy parts of Lebanon by the Israelis. The Americans, it seems, have sort of just given the green light at this point. So I'm curious what you think the prospects of that happening is.
I think it's great news to hear that the Israelis think they can change the names of the villages in the south of Lebanon, and they can occupy the south of Lebanon, because their overconfidence means that their fall will be harder. And we're talking about the ground forces that are still intact. I'm sorry to say, to disappoint many people, that we haven't seen yet what the missile forces are capable of. And I think soon they will regret to think that the missile forces units have been depleted, or they have no longer the possibility. If you start counting how many missiles are going to fall on Israel on every day, you understand that Hezbollah can fire at least the same amount every single day, or go gradually higher if they go higher. So I think this is going to be shown very soon. Secondly, saying that they threaten the Lebanese airport is again great news, because it means that Hezbollah has a right to treat the Ben Gurion airport and other airports in the same way, because the Israelis violate the Lebanese sovereignty by threatening the Lebanese airport, the only airport that is in the country, and they bombed the civilian area in the Dahieh. They bombed civilian area in the south of Lebanon, and in the Bekaa Valley. They offered on a silver plate to Hezbollah the possibility to do exactly the same, when Hezbollah was trying to avoid all these and was losing, because avoiding all the non-combatant targets, Hezbollah is not the match of the Israeli Air Force. But when all the red lines are lifted, then this is where there is a little relief for Hezbollah, which means the Israelis have invited Hezbollah to treat its civilians in the same way, to treat the airport in the same way. But what about the surface-to-surface missile that can destroy all the oil and gas platforms? We haven't seen any yet. What about the harbor of Haifa and Eilat? We haven't seen any attack on these harbors yet. The moment the Israeli threatened the harbor in Beirut, I think the harbors in Israel will be shut down completely. But maybe people will start laughing at what I'm saying now. But the Israelis said they have exhausted their bank of objectives. If Hezbollah doesn't show its strength very soon, it means Israel has won the war. If Israel see that Hezbollah is incapable of replying, then the natural thing to do is to walk in the army and take as much as they want from the Lebanese territory in the south of Lebanon. But remember, 1982, Hezbollah had very little weapons to fight. And it took them 18 years to teach the Israelis a lesson. Israel, when it's supported by the US and NATO since the beginning. So with the very little capability, when Israel walked into the Lebanon, it was not considered an enemy by many people in the south of Lebanon at the first beginning. It became an enemy. Now every single person in the south of Lebanon would love to see Israel losing men on the Lebanese soil to teach them a lesson. If Hezbollah is not capable of doing so, then the south of Lebanon is doomed. which is not something that I think is going to happen. On the contrary, and I think Israel need to reevaluate if they want to go into the south of Lebanon, if they see Hezbollah's capability is still strong enough to inflict pain on Israel. And by seeing that and going to a ground invasion, that will be a wrong military move, which is something that Hezbollah will not dislike because that gives the opportunity for the Ridwan forces, the special forces, to be engaged. Doesn't mean that Hezbollah is waiting for them to come. On the contrary, nobody wants the war to expand. But if they think they can come in, then this is why the Ridwan forces have been trained for when they were considered as the intervention force in the year 2000, and then they were turned into special forces, trained like any other special forces around the world, and much more than that. And these are the ones who are going to meet the Israelis when they can no longer use their air force and they have to meet face to face with the Israelis and the special forces of Hezbollah.
So, Elijah, there's just a couple more things I want to ask you about here before we close. And one I think is very important to address. And I've seen a couple people asking about it. Though I do want to remind everyone before I ask it, we have over 5,000 people watching, which is fantastic. However, only 1.3 thousand have liked the stream. So I can't imagine all 5,000 of you are hate watching. So if you haven't already, please smash that like button. It does help boost us in the algorithm. The algorithm always works against us. So the more you like it, the more people who can see this important analysis from Elijah. So Elijah, I want to ask you about the prospect of civil unrest, because this is something that historically, the Israelis and Americans have tried to foment in Lebanon through sectarian divisions. And it's worked in the past. It's, not even the too distant past. And so far, the country has been quite united, with a few rare instances of division, which has been good to see. But like you said, we're only 2 weeks into this. So it's still quite early. And uniting kind of sometimes has a statute of limitations. And what I've seen talking to family and friends, especially as I've been trying to get people, people who need housing housed, is that we see in certain towns and villages and areas that are considered still safe in Lebanon, where displaced people are being housed. Some landlords and homeowners have received messages and phone calls threatening to bomb their property if they allow, these people to stay in their homes, because one of them's Hezbollah, is how the Israelis would say it, or one of them's a terrorist. And of course, this sort of thing has led to some people being kicked out, and also leads to, because so far this is a war on Shia neighborhoods, right? So it leads to animosity towards displaced Shias and people being less likely to help them as time goes on. So we also saw, there's people, those typical voices who always want to foment unrest in Lebanon, who are doing their victory lap about the degradation of Hezbollah's senior leadership, saying now is the opportunity for the Americans to support the opposition. And we know in Lebanon, the opposition to Hezbollah means the Lebanese forces in Kataib, which are fascistic groups that have historically carried out sectarian massacres. So I guess my question is, do you see the possibility of civil unrest amidst this horrific war we're watching play out?
I think you realize that I always look at the glass half full, but not half empty.
I appreciate that.
And for that, I think the people expressing their ideas or their position against Hezbollah is great, because it means the areas where all the Shia refugees are not going to be bombarded, because they are considered the friend of Israel and the friend of America, which is great protection for the people who are within the society of Hezbollah, and they need to go to stay in a safe place. And that will allow the fighters to be tranquil about the fate of their families. And they will be very confident to go and fight the Israelis and offer the maximum sacrifices without thinking that their families are in danger. Now, in Lebanon, we have always heard a lot of talk from people in the street, and they express their disagreement with Hezbollah, and others agree with Hezbollah. The Lebanese society is divided. That's a fact. which is good because it shows that people don't agree with Hezbollah and other people agree with Hezbollah. And this division is something that the Americans have tried in the past to capitalize on. The only point here to highlight is the Shia will never return to the old ages when they were the oppressed people. Since Imam Musa Sadr came to Lebanon and gave the possibility for the Shia to be armed to protect themselves when the government failed to protect them, the Shia have decided never to give up and never to give up on their rights and to protect themselves if the government is not protected them. Had the government done its job, there's no point for Hezbollah to exist. Hezbollah has existed because nobody defended Lebanon when the Israeli invaded the country. And Hezbollah continued to exist because all the services in the Shia area, in the Bekaa Valley, in the Dahi, before that in Naba, and in the Christian area, and after that in Dahi and in the south of Lebanon, they were the deprived society. They received nothing. They were not giving any jobs. They were considered good for serving as waiters in a restaurant or working at the harbor to shift goods, and that's it. But today, this society grown. There are intellectuals, there are doctors, there are engineers, there are handicraft, there are thinkers, there are philosophers, but there are also fighters. And these people will never accept to be humiliated again. And even if Israel goes in the south of Lebanon, for whatever reason, they will have the joy to continue fighting Israel. Because Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, told the Israeli at the beginning of the war one sentence that I found brilliant, that the Israelis never learned from it. And he said, "Don't make our mistakes. We have failed to earn the heart and the mind of the population." The Americans went to Afghanistan, and after 20 years, they were kicked out, taking the power from the Taliban to give it back to the Taliban. In Iraq, they went and occupied Iraq and they were kicked out. And they returned after ISIS controlled Iraq in specific places, but not as occupier as before. They still occupy a part. And they went to Libya and they failed. They went to Syria and they failed. They are hated by the entire Middle East, and those who do not hate them fear them. This is not earning the heart and the mind of the population. The Israelis have lost everything or any connection with the population of the Middle East. And showing how Israel is strong and imposing the Abraham Accord and normalization, because Israel can destroy. But what Israel has destroyed, Gaza, 360 square kilometers, or Lebanon, 10,400 square kilometers? Not yet. Is that the capability of the strongest army in the world and the 14th in the world and the strongest in the Middle East? That's very slim. And yet, no one in Gaza raised the white flag. And no one in Lebanon is going to raise the white flag, not domestically and not to the Americans or to the Israelis.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. And the last thing I want to ask you, I'm just going to make a couple comments and I'm going to ask you this question. I do see like a lot of people are very angry. They're like, well, why was Hassan Nasrallah in South Beirut and not in like some mountain bunker somewhere? Like, why did Hezbollah make all these mistakes? And I mean, I think there are a lot of questions to be asked. I imagine they're being asked internally, but I do want to say, when you're fighting the most powerful military empire in the history of the world, and that's what Israel is, because Israel is an extension of America and it has the full backing of America. And, you've covered war for a very long time, Elijah. You saw the aftermath of Sabra and Shatila, which is one of the most horrific acts of violence in the region ever. I think what we're witnessing now is a more depraved kind of imperialism than anything we've ever seen. I mean, I saw someone pointing out that George W. Bush had actually criticized Israel for in the early 2000s when they killed Hamas's leader because they killed 7 civilians in the process, and that was too much collateral damage. Now we have an entire political spectrum in the US that includes the Democratic president and vice president, who's probably going to be the next president, releasing statements calling the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, which was carried out by killing hundreds of civilians in residential buildings, hundreds, not 7, hundreds, an act of justice that they fully support. That is the kind of American imperialism and empire we are dealing with today. I think it's more depraved than ever before, and it is a huge adversary to be up against. And I mean, Hezbollah, Iran, this resistance axis, they're made up of people who, picked up arms defending their land to the best of their ability. Maybe mistakes are made, but at the same time, they don't have the resources or the technology or the advanced weaponry of the monster that they're fighting. And I think that's important to keep in mind in terms of resistance, because resistance loses sometimes, a lot of times, actually. And, there's some people who I think maybe only want to support it when it's winning. I don't know. But all that's to say, I guess my question here is to the U.S. question. You and I have often talked about the U.S. the threat to the U.S. in the region if they allow this to explode into a regional war. We're closer to that possibility now than we were 2 weeks ago, right? And that's all to say, do you think the U.S. is making a miscalculation here? Because it seems like something in the U.S. has shifted in terms of those in power, where they went from trying to constrain Israel on the issue of Lebanon to avoid this all-out regional war to kind of just greenlighting whatever Israel does. I'm not sure what's changed, but is that a miscalculation on their part? Does the reality of U.S. as sitting ducks across the region remain if they continue to allow this to expand?
For many years, I used to think that the American administration is intelligence and they plan for 5, 10, and 20 years ahead. But then when I saw how they occupy Afghanistan and how they occupy Iraq, I understood the level of stupidity of the decision makers in the US. There are many thinkers in the US who are extremely intelligent, but they do not have influence over the decision makers. They can be the most brilliant people on earth, and if their voice is not heard, it means they have no influence, and the US administration will continue doing the same thing. So if we see the Americans were very powerful, 1982, they landed in Lebanon, and they were kicked out. They've landed in Iraq was completely dismantled, and they were kicked out. So the Americans, at the end of the day, they have the most powerful machine, but they cannot stay in a country. They can win the country, but they can't stay. They can go to war, but they can't make peace. And after war, what's going to happen? How are they going to build? They build nothing wherever they went. They destroyed Afghanistan. They've destroyed Iraq. They've destroyed Syria. They've destroyed Libya. Wherever they went, they did not create a base where people will like them to stay or will like their influence. They're afraid of them. But this fear can go. So what's happening today is completely different. We cannot talk about an all-out war for the simple reason. The Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz. Ansarullah control the Red Sea. Hezbollah can control with the surface-to-surface missile the Mediterranean. What's going to happen to the world economy is going to be completely destroyed. Can the Americans prevent that from happening? Of course not. They could not prevent, with the strongest navy in the world, along with the British one, the Ansarullah to open the Red Sea for the navigation they want. So what's going to happen in other places? And also, an all-out war means what? We've seen Donald Trump, what he did when he killed the Brigadier General Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Brigadier General, and the Iraqi commander Abu Mahdi Mohandes. He received 16 missiles next day and did nothing, did not react. And McKinsey, the chief of staff, said Iran could have inflicted on us between 100 and 150 soldiers killed in that very precise bombing. That was a message for the future for the US to be engaged in any war against Iran. Yes, the US can destroy Iran, but can prevent Iran from retaliating? No. Hezbollah can have many of its warehouses destroyed. Can Israel stop Hezbollah from retaliating? No. Can the Americans stop the Iraqis from bombing their military bases? Of course not. They're sitting duck in Ain al-Assad, in Al-Taji, next to the airport in Iraq. They can't do that. You can kill many people, but you can't deter them and stop them from attacking because these people have an ideology and they're fighting out of an ideology. And this is why they cannot be defeated. All the Israeli official and military commander told Netanyahu, Hamas is an idea. You cannot defeat it. In the past, we know also that Al Qaeda is an idea, cannot be defeated. So all these ideology cannot be defeated. They will always continue existing in one way or another. So I am not worried about an all-out war in the Middle East because nobody wants it and it's not going to happen. As long as Hezbollah is fighting, Hamas did not surrender. Netanyahu went from Gaza to the West Bank, from the West Bank to Lebanon. He's looking for a victory. Is this going to be his victory or his graveyard? I think it's going to be his graveyard.
I mean, we'll see about that. I think also there's an emotional, psychological, terrorizing element of all this, right? Like watching, I have to say, I don't know how Palestinians have dealt with the last year, because watching my own country be treated this way is very, very difficult. Watching a catastrophe unfold, what feels like almost overnight. I mean, I was in Beirut 2 weeks ago. And obviously there was a war in the South villages, but this was not happening. What's happening now wasn't happening. So I think it's also just a real shock. This was a campaign of shock and awe the last 2 weeks, and everyone is still kind of reeling from the shock and the emotional toll of it all. That's more of a comment than a question. But I guess go ahead, please.
Yeah, the problem is international laws don't exist anymore. The protection of non-combatant is inexistent. The International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice have no power. The United Nations have no power. But this is why the United Nations issue many resolutions giving the people, the resistance, the right of armed resisting. And this right is the only thing that exists in the international law that the population is doing. And no occupation forces can defeat the resistance. Look what happened in Palestine, 1948, despite all the massacres and the exodus of the Palestinians never stopped fighting. Lebanon is the same. Lebanon never stopped fighting since 1982 when the country was invaded and will never stop. Israel cannot win. It can destroy, but it cannot win.
Well, I think that's a good note to leave it on. Elijah, I want to thank you. And real quick before we wrap or end, can you remind people where they can follow along your excellent analysis?
On my blog, they can subscribe. I am on Twitter. They can just type my name and they will find me.
Elijah, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. Make sure you like the stream, you guys. Super important for boosting it in the algorithm. And Elijah, I hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you for having me.